The Galactic Council was a vast and ancient assembly made up of representatives from thousands of different species across the stars. They met once a year on the planet Accordia, a neutral ground where diplomacy and discussions of galactic peace were always the focus. This year, however, something was different. The atmosphere was heavier, the conversations were strained as tensions between rival factions had grown sharper than ever. Earth had been a recent addition to the Council, a young and ambitious species that had earned respect not through centuries of influence or power, but through an unyielding will to survive. Despite their youth, humans had managed to place themselves at the table alongside civilizations that had been navigating the stars for millennia. Ambassador Elias Kane sat quietly at the front of the Grand Chamber, where representatives of the galaxy's greatest species exchanged formal pleasantries and proposals. Earth had always been a voice of reason, an advocate for peace and diplomacy. But today Kane was restless. He could feel the weight of the decisions about to be made pressing down on him. The Council was about to vote on a new initiative, one that would push the galaxy closer to an all-out war. The Telothians, a once dominant species that had been in decline for centuries, were suddenly on the rise again. Their raids against weaker civilizations had become more frequent, and more brutal rumors of their increasing aggression had begun to spread, and it was clear that something had to be done. Kane had been in countless meetings with galactic leaders over the years and had witnessed the usual debates. The larger factions often spoke of peace solutions, of sanctions, and negotiations with the same tired rhetoric that had failed to stop the bloodshed of the past. The smaller civilizations pushed for protection from the Exolothians, but their pleas were often dismissed as the mighty Council dragged its feet on any meaningful action. Kane had spent years listening to these endless discussions and watching as no progress was made. He had long since grown disillusioned with the Council's inability to act. The Exolothians could not be reasoned with. They would not be stopped by mere talks or treaties. Kane knew it was time for a different approach. As the meeting continued with more talks of sanctions and diplomatic pressure, Kane stood up slowly, his mind made up. He knew the risks of what he was about to do. The Council had always prized diplomacy above all else, but as the eyes of hundreds of delegates turned toward him, Kane took a deep breath and with calm determination spoke the words that would change the course of galactic history. He declared the words that no one had expected to hear from a human diplomat. "It's time for war." A murmur rippled through the chamber, a collective gasp, as the room seemed to freeze in shock. At that moment, Kane could feel the weight of every eye upon him. The Telothians were a threat, and Earth had the strength and resolve to meet it. Kane spoke of the growing dangers facing the galaxy, how the time for talks had passed, and how humanity would no longer sit idle as others suffered. He spoke of Earth's history of overcoming impossible odds, and how it was in the human spirit to rise up and fight when there was no other choice. His words hung in the air as the Council members exchanged uncertain glances. Some were furious, others were intrigued, but no one knew what to make of the bold proclamation from a species still finding its footing in the vast galaxy. The room remained silent for several moments, the weight of Kane's declaration hanging heavy in the air. The assembled members of the Galactic Council exchanged uneasy glances, their minds struggling to process what had just been said. Some of the older species, who had witnessed generations of galactic peace and prosperity, found the human diplomat's words not only shocking but deeply unsettling. The Exolothians had always been a threat, but their raids had been far from an existential crisis. Diplomacy, they believed, was the only path forward. Ambassador Leor of the Zorants, a race known for their meticulous intelligence and cold pragmatism, was the first to speak. His voice was icy, laced with disbelief. "Humanity is suggesting war against the Exolothians as a solution. Your species has barely established itself as a galactic power. You dare challenge the balance of power we have spent millennia maintaining." His words were pointed, his disapproval evident. Kane's gaze did not falter. "I am suggesting war because it is the only thing left of us. The Exolothians will not stop until they have destroyed or subjugated every weaker species they encounter. And if the Council continues to delay action, it will be too late." His voice was calm but firm, every word carrying the weight of truth. A low murmur spread throughout the chamber. Representatives from smaller, more vulnerable civilizations looked at each other in a mix of fear and hope. There were whispers of agreement among those who had suffered under the Xolothian raids in the past. Earth had become an unexpected beacon of strength, and now it seemed the humans were calling the galaxy to action. But for the established powers of the Council, it was a hard pill to swallow. Ambassador Drez of the Aldar, an ancient species known for their wisdom and telepathic abilities, raised his hand, signaling for silence. His tone was thoughtful yet cautious. What you propose, Ambassador Kane, could throw the galaxy into chaos. Do you truly believe your people are prepared for the cost of war? The Xolothians are not an adversary to be underestimated. Are you suggesting that Earth can stand against them without provoking a wider conflict? Kane nodded. We are already at war, whether we admit it or not. The Xolothians have been expanding for months, raiding and claiming systems at will. You have all seen the reports. The smaller worlds are helpless against their onslaught. Earth cannot, in good conscience, wait any longer for a vote or a negotiation that will never come. We will defend ourselves and anyone who asks for our help. The room erupted into voices once again. Some argued for caution, suggesting more measures to slow the Xolothians down. Others believed it was too soon to make such a bold move. And then, unexpectedly, a voice of support rang out. He's right, said Empress Solana of the Zoran Empire. Her presence, commanding and authoritative, silenced the room once more. The Xolothians have gone unchecked for far too long. We have dealt with them for centuries, and they only understand one thing: force. If the humans are willing to confront them head-on, they will have the Zoran Empire's full support. The shock of her words rippled through the room. The Zoran Empire was one of the most formidable and warlike civilizations in the galaxy, and their backing could shift the balance of power entirely. The Council, now divided, faced a new reality. Earth was no longer just a voice for peace. It had become a symbol of resolve and action. The room fell into stunned silence once more, but this time it was a silence of contemplation. The support of the Zoran Empire shifted the entire conversation, drawing more attention to the implications of Kane's declaration. Empress Solana's voice, commanding and unwavering, had shaken the Council's foundation. Now the chamber was filled with nervous anticipation as every representative weighed the potential consequences of Kane's words. For the first time in years, it seemed the galaxy might be at the brink of something far more significant than a mere diplomatic negotiation. Kane allowed the weight of the moment to sink in before speaking again. He could sense the trepidation and uncertainty of the council members around him, but he also saw the flicker of something else: curiosity, perhaps even respect. The humans had shown a side of themselves that no one had anticipated, and now they were watching to see how far Earth's resolve would stretch. I understand your concerns, Kane began, his voice calm but resolute. But I must ask you to reconsider the narrative. We humans are not so naive as to believe we can resolve everything with a handshake. We know war is not the ideal solution, but we are not afraid to take action when necessary. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the skeptical delegates. We have survived wars on our own world, we have faced near extinction, and we've emerged stronger every time. What we lack in experience in the stars, we make up for in determination. Earth will not stand by while others suffer. We will fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and we will fight to end the tyranny of the Xolothians. The words seemed to resonate, especially with the smaller representatives who had long been under the shadow of larger, more powerful civilizations. For many, Kane's words were a call to arms, an invitation to no longer cower in fear, but to rise up alongside Earth in solidarity. But the larger factions who had enjoyed their positions of dominance for centuries began to see a new threat in this rising power: humanity's unwavering spirit. Ambassador Drez of the Aldar spoke again, his tone softer now, yet still tinged with skepticism. You speak of humanity's resilience, but war takes more than resolve. It takes resources, strategies, and the will to endure unimaginable loss. Do you truly believe Earth can bear that weight without tearing itself apart? Kane's response was quick, but not boastful. We already bear it. Humanity has lived through catastrophes, and each time we adapt. The will to fight is not in the weapons we wield or the ships we command, it is in the hearts of our people. We have allies who are already ready to fight with us, including the Zorans. But more than that, we have a purpose. To protect the galaxy from the rise of a force that will destroy all that we've built. If we allow the Xalothians to continue, then we are all complicit in their conquest. The tension in the room began to shift. Some of the delegates who had previously feared conflict now began to see the validity in Kane's stance. The Xalothians, after all, were not a mere threat to Earth or to the smaller civilizations. They were a danger to the entire galaxy. And if no one acted now, the future of the galaxy could fall into chaos. One by one, representatives began to speak up. Some, like the Duratians, long known for their passive approach to diplomacy, remained firmly opposed to any military action. But others, like the Hanorans, a once neutral species with vast trade networks, began to consider the idea. Their leader, Ambassador Thal, stood, his voice cutting through the murmurs. We will not let this destruction continue unchecked. Humanity's strength may just be the catalyst we need. The seeds of a shifting alliance had been planted. The Council was now at a crossroads. Would they continue down the path of diplomacy, or would they allow Earth's bold stance to redefine the future of the galaxy? The stakes had never been higher, and as the session drew to a close, it was clear that the coming days would be filled with more uncertainty, but also with a glimmer of hope for those who have long dreamed of standing against tyranny. As the Galactic Council adjourned for a brief recess, the weight of the discussions continued to linger in the air. Delegates clustered in small groups, whispering to one another, exchanging thoughts and strategies. Some were still incredulous, unable to fathom the idea of war being the solution. Others were cautiously optimistic, seeing humanity's bold stance as a necessary wake-up call for a galaxy that had grown too complacent. The Zoran Empire's support for Earth had shifted the balance, but it had also raised the stakes. There was no turning back now. Ambassador Elias Kane took a moment to gather himself. The storm had only just begun, but he knew that humanity's role in this conflict was no longer a question. His words had resonated, but now it was time for action. The Xalothians were growing stronger by the day, and the Council would need to come to a decision before it was too late. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't anticipated the ripple of support that had followed in the wake of his declaration. Still, he wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. Not all species would fall in line so quickly. His thoughts were interrupted as Empress Solana approached him. The Zoran leader's tall, imposing figure cast a shadow over him, her steely eyes betraying little emotion. She had made her stance clear during the session, but now she had a more private message to convey. "You were right, Kane," she said, her voice low and direct. "The Xalothians are too dangerous to be ignored any longer. They are not like the other threats we faced. They are relentless, and they have grown bolder. The galaxy's complacency has allowed them to regroup, and now they are pushing into sectors they haven't touched in centuries." Kane nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes steady. "What will you do, Empress? Will your people stand by our side when the time comes?" The Zoran Empire had long been a symbol of military power, their fleet unmatched in tactics and efficiency. Yet their involvement in galactic politics had been a delicate dance, one based on careful calculation. Solana's agreement to back Earth's call for war was a significant shift, and Kane knew that her support could be the turning point in the conflict. "We will fight," Solana declared firmly. "But you should know this. While our fleets are at your disposal, we will not do this out of charity. We fight for our own survival and for the survival of those who can stand with us. The Xalothians have never respected alliances. They seek to dominate, to subjugate. If Earth intends to challenge them, we will need to do more than just fight. We will need to take the offensive." Her words carried weight. The Zoran Empire had long held a reputation for precision strikes, never committing their full might unless absolutely necessary. If they were willing to make an all-out assault on the Zolothians, then the balance of power in the galaxy would shift dramatically. I understand, Cain replied. We'll fight on our terms, but we need the Council to back us. We need more than words. If the galaxy is to survive, we have to unite in purpose, not just in action. Solana paused, her eyes narrowing as she considered his words. The Council may not act as swiftly as you hope, but the Zorans will stand by your side. Be prepared for what comes next. If the Zolothians do not bend to our will, we will strike first. And when that happens, the rest of the galaxy will have no choice but to choose a side. With that, the Empress turned, leaving Cain alone with his thoughts. As he watched her walk away, he knew that the true test was still ahead. The galaxy was about to be plunged into war, and while some might falter, humanity would face the coming storm head-on. The stakes were higher than ever, but for the first time, Cain felt a sense of certainty. Humanity was no longer an outlier in galactic affairs. Earth was ready to lead. The Council resumed its session after a brief break, and the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted. The initial shock of Cain's declaration had settled, replaced by a palpable tension. The decision that loomed ahead would be unlike any the galaxy had faced in centuries. For the first time in a long while, the prospect of war felt real, not just a distant possibility. There was a sense of urgency in the air, and no one could deny that the Zolothians were pressing forward with alarming speed. Ambassador Elias Cain stood at the front of the room, his expression resolute. Behind him, a small delegation of human officers stood ready to present the details of Earth's military strategy. They had been preparing for this moment, knowing that they would have to prove their readiness, their ability to lead, and their strength. The Zoran Empire's backing had added weight to their cause, but now it was time for action. We cannot afford hesitation, Cain began, his voice calm but unwavering. The Zolothians have already begun to consolidate their forces along the outer rim, raiding vulnerable colonies and leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Their strategy is clear: overwhelm and subjugate. If we don't act now, it will be too late. He turned to the holographic display behind him, showing the latest intelligence reports. The Zolothian fleets had grown in numbers, and their advances had pushed into areas previously thought to be safe. The once quiet sectors of the galaxy were now battlegrounds. Cain pointed to a series of flashing red dots, indicating the locations of the most recent Zolothian attacks. These are the worlds that have already fallen, Cain continued, his finger hovering over the glowing icons. And these are the ones they are targeting next. The Zolothians have no mercy. We must act swiftly, or the balance of the galaxy will be irreparably destroyed. The silence in the room was heavy as the council members absorbed the gravity of the situation. Cain's words had cut through the fog of diplomacy, bringing the harsh reality into focus. The galaxy was facing an existential threat, and humanity, despite its relative youth, was stepping forward to face it head-on. At the far side of the room, Ambassador Lear of the Zoran spoke up, his voice skeptical but tinged with reluctant respect. You speak of action, Ambassador Cain, but what exactly are you proposing? Do you truly believe Earth is capable of leading this war? Your people are inexperienced in galactic combat. The Zolothians are formidable foes. What do you have to offer that will make a difference? Cain stood tall, meeting Lear's gaze. What we have is resolve, he said simply. We have been preparing for this moment since the first signs of the Zolothian resurgence. Earth may not have the experience of the great empires, but we have something that cannot be measured in military power: the will to protect what is ours, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Humanity has faced impossible odds before, and each time we have come out stronger. His words hung in the air, a challenge to the larger species who had long dominated the galaxy. Cain wasn't just speaking of military might, he was speaking of human determination, a force that had shaped their history and survival. The council members, many of whom had viewed humanity as a species still finding its way in the stars, now saw the truth in his words. Humanity might not have the sheer firepower of older species, but it had an unbreakable spirit. Just as the room was about to erupt into further debate, a transmission came through, a live feed from a recently attacked system. The footage was raw and unfiltered. It showed the aftermath of its Lothian assault, with scorched landscapes and devastated cities. The images were brutal and undeniable. The Exolothians were relentless. "This," Kane said quietly, "is what we are facing. This is why we must act. Earth will not stand idle." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't from disbelief. It was from realization. The Exolothians had made their position clear, and now the galaxy had to decide. Would they stand together against this growing threat, or would they be left to watch as the galaxy was consumed by darkness? The room remained still, the image of the destroyed system still lingering in the minds of the council members. The once abstract threat of the Exolothians had now become something undeniable, something real. The devastation before them was a stark reminder that the galaxy was teetering on the edge of an abyss, and if they did not act, more worlds would fall to the Exolothians' brutal expansion. Kane's eyes scanned the faces in the room, noting the subtle shifts in expression. Some were still resolutely opposed, but others, those who had once resisted, now seemed to question their stance. Ambassador Drez of the Aldar was the first to break the silence. His voice was low, but there was a hint of weariness in it that hadn't been there before. "The evidence is clear, Ambassador Kane. The Exolothians cannot be allowed to continue their rampage. However, the question remains, how do we proceed from here?" Kane nodded, anticipating the question. "We act as one. The Zoran Empire has pledged its fleets to the cause, and Earth is prepared to mobilize its forces. We will launch a combined offensive, targeting the heart of the Solothian military presence. But we need more. We need the Council to come together and back this initiative. We cannot fight this battle alone." Ambassador Lear of the Zorans stood up, his expression still filled with skepticism, but laced with curiosity. "The Zorans may have agreed to support your cause, but what of the rest of us? The threat is real, yes, but we are talking about a galactic war. This will have consequences for every civilization here, whether they fight or not. What guarantees can you offer that this will not spiral out of control?" Kane met Lear's gaze without hesitation. "I cannot promise there will be no casualties. War is inevitable, and it is not a path anyone chooses lightly. But what I can promise is this: if we do nothing, the cost will be far greater. We will lose everything, and the galaxy will be plunged into a new era of chaos. The Exolothians will stop at nothing to dominate every system they touch. If we act now, we can prevent that future." The council chamber was a cauldron of tension as the delegates whispered among themselves, the weight of Kane's words sinking in. The Exolothian threat was no longer an abstract discussion. It was a reality that would consume the galaxy if they didn't act. The larger, more established species could no longer sit on the sidelines. The stakes had risen too high. Ambassador Thal of the Henorans, a species known for their neutral stance in galactic affairs, spoke next. "I never imagined I would hear such words from a human diplomat," he said, his tone both impressed and cautious. "But perhaps it is time for a new way of thinking. We have always avoided conflict, hoping that diplomacy would prevail. Yet, as you have shown, diplomacy has failed. If the galaxy is to survive, we must unite against this Solothian threat. The Henorans will lend their support to this effort." The room fell into stunned silence. The Henorans' backing was a game-changer. Known for their vast trading networks and influence over numerous neutral systems, their support would sway many on the fence. Kane allowed a brief moment for the weight of the announcement to settle before he spoke again. "This is the beginning of something much larger," Kane said, his voice unwavering. "We are no longer a collection of individual systems or species. We are a united front, and together we will stop the Solothians before they destroy everything we hold dear. This is the moment when the galaxy chooses to stand together." The murmurs of agreement spread throughout the room, growing louder with each passing second. It was clear now, an alliance was forming, one that could challenge the might of the Exolothians and reshape the course of galactic history. Kane knew the road ahead would be difficult, fraught with risks and challenges. But for the first time, he saw the spark of hope in the eyes of the council members. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival, it was leading the charge for the galaxy's future. And with that, the decision was made. The war for the galaxy had begun. The decision was made, and with it came a new sense of urgency. The Galactic Council was no longer a body of indecisive diplomats. It was a unified force preparing for an all-out war. Kane could feel the weight of history on his shoulders as he stepped away from the council chamber, the heavy responsibility of leadership pressing down on him. The moment they had feared was now upon them, and it was clear that the galaxy was ready to follow Earth's lead. The first order of business was to secure the resources necessary for the upcoming conflict. Kane knew that while Earth had made significant strides in its technological advancements, they would need the support of the other factions to match the sheer scale of the Solothian threat. The Zorans, with their battle-hardened fleets, were a critical asset, but other species had unique strengths to contribute. In the following days, Kane met with representatives from the various member states, working tirelessly to form a coordinated strategy. The Zorans agreed to lend their full fleet, while the Henorans promised a steady supply of resources, particularly crucial for the logistics of war. The Zorans, despite their initial reluctance, offered their intelligence networks, a key asset for gathering information on Solothian movements. But there were still factions on the council that hesitated. The Aldar, while acknowledging the severity of the Solothian threat, were wary of any military escalation. They had seen too many conflicts, and their cautious nature made them reluctant to join a war they did not fully understand. Ambassador Drez remained a voice of reason for many, urging caution at every step. Kane knew that convincing them was going to be a challenge. "We need to show them that inaction is not an option," he said to his inner circle, a small group of human officers and diplomats. "The Aldar are risk-averse, but they are also pragmatic. If we can demonstrate that the Solothians are not just a threat to smaller systems, but to everyone, we may win them over." Days turned into weeks as the alliance began to solidify. Earth's fleet, newly upgraded and bolstered with support from the other civilizations, was ready for its first major offensive. The coordinated assault would target a major Solothian stronghold in a contested system on the Outer Rim, a place where their forces had begun to fortify their position. The attack would serve as a message, not only to the Solothians but to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity, backed by an alliance of galactic powers, was a force to be reckoned with. Kane stood on the bridge of the human flagship, the U.S. Resolute, as the fleet prepared for departure. The vast expanse of space stretched before him, the stars twinkling with the promise of a future that would either be won or lost in the coming days. He had watched humanity rise from the ashes of its own conflicts, and now they were about to lead a war on a scale no one had ever imagined. "Ambassador," King, the voice of Captain Matthews, his tone steady but filled with anticipation, "we are ready to depart. The fleet is in position." Kane nodded, his mind focused. "Let's make sure the Solothians understand what they've started. Humanity is not just surviving. We are fighting for the future of the galaxy." The fleet's engines roared to life, and the Resolute led the charge into the unknown. As they hurtled through space, Kane couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility once more. There was no turning back now. The war for the galaxy had begun, and Earth was at its forefront. The first battle would set the tone for everything that followed. The silence of space was deafening as the human fleet, now reinforced by their allies, approached the Solothian stronghold. The stars shimmered coldly in the distance, and the vast emptiness stretched before them. The U.S. Resolute led the charge, its hull gleaming with the promise of Earth's resolve. Behind it, a coalition of ships from the Zoran Empire, the Henorans, and other species stood ready, their weapons primed for the coming conflict. Every ship, every soldier, and every diplomat had a single purpose: to end the threat of the Solothians. Kane stood at the command center of the Resolute, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the layout of the system. He could see the massive Solothian fortress world looming ahead, its orbit filled with enemy ships. The Asilothians had fortified their position with military precision, but Kane knew they were not invincible. Their arrogance and reliance on their superior numbers had made them vulnerable. It was time to remind them that the galaxy was not theirs to conquer. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Captain Matthews commanded, his voice calm but filled with a tension that matched the gravity of the moment. "This is it. Stay sharp and follow the plan to the letter." Kane's mind raced as he watched the ships align in formation. His role was not as a military strategist, but as a diplomat, a leader who had rallied the galaxy to this cause. He had built this alliance from the ground up, and now it was time to see if it would hold under the heat of battle. "Sir," Lieutenant Harlow, the tactical officer, spoke up, her voice tight with urgency. "We're detecting a sudden movement from the Asilothian fleet. They're starting to engage us earlier than anticipated." Kane's eyes narrowed. The Asilothians were known for their brutal tactics, but this was unexpected. They hadn't anticipated such a large, unified force. The fact that they were willing to engage so quickly meant they had no intention of negotiating. They were determined to crush this alliance before it could gain momentum. Countermeasures in place, Lieutenant Harlow continued. "We're prepared to take them head-on, but we'll need full support from the Zoran and Henneran fleets to push through." Kane didn't hesitate. "Then let's make sure they regret underestimating us. All ships engage the Asilothians. Show them what we're made of." The battle erupted in an instant. Laser fire streaked across the void, bright explosions lighting up the darkness. Ships weaved through the chaos, their shields flaring as they took hit after hit. The Asilothians' fleets were massive, their ships larger and more numerous than anything humanity had faced before, but the alliance was united, and that made all the difference. Kane's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the unfolding battle. The human fleet fought with a ferocity that shocked even the battle-hardened Zorans. It wasn't just technology that made them dangerous. It was their determination, their refusal to back down, even when faced with overwhelming odds. Zoran ships flanked the enemy from the left, carrying the command from Empress Solana over the comms. "We'll give them no chance to regroup." The Zorans were a well-oiled machine, their fleets cutting through the Asilothian lines with surgical precision. Meanwhile, the Hennerans provided vital support, their advanced supply ships ensuring that the fleet remained well-supplied and ready for the prolonged conflict. The tide of battle began to turn as the combined force of the galaxy pushed forward. Kane watched as the Asilothian flagship, a massive and imposing structure, began to falter under the combined assault. It was a pivotal moment. He knew that if they could cripple the Asilothians' command ship, it would break their morale and send them scrambling. "Captain Matthews," Kane called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Take out their flagship. We end this now." The Resolute's engines roared as it surged forward, breaking through the Asilothian defenses. The battle was fierce, but with the combined might of their forces, the alliance was unstoppable. One final salvo from the Resolute hit the Asilothian flagship, and it erupted in a massive explosion, its remains scattering into the cold emptiness of space. The Asilothians had been dealt a crushing blow. The alliance had proven its strength, and the galaxy had witnessed humanity's resolve. As the battle began to wind down and the Asilothian forces retreated, Kane allowed himself a moment to breathe. The first victory was theirs, but the war was far from over. There would be many more battles ahead, and many more sacrifices. But humanity had proven that they were no longer just survivors. They were leaders, and they would stop at nothing to ensure the galaxy's future. The war had begun, and it was humanity's time to rise.